Hey there, this is Kamal, and in this video we'll be seeing how we can create a REST API using Node, Express and MongoDB. I'll be trying to explain the concepts along the way, so just tag along as we'll be exploring these concepts and creating a simple REST API for you to build. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get this started. Okay, so first things first, as any other video in our channel, I've already uploaded the code to GitHub and it's under the name of REST-API-Node-Express. So this is the repository. I'll provide the link in the description down below. I've also included the curl request that we'll be using to interact with our APIs that we're going to create. And I've also linked the YouTube video here. As of now, that's not the correct YouTube video, but once this is uploaded, I'll be linking that there. Along with that, I've also provided the Postman collection inside the code itself. So you can download that and import it into Postman, and you can use that to interact with the REST API service that you're creating in Node.js. Okay, so let's open a new terminal instance, and in here, let's use the npm to actually initiate a new Node project. So let's type in npm init. So this is going to be the package name. Since we're all inside that particular folder, I'll leave it as it is. The version is going to be 1.0.0. The entry point is going to be server.js. So basically that's going to be the root file for our particular project. So you can keep it as index.js or you can go with server.js as well. I'll not add any test commands, so I'll just leave it as it is. And Git repository, if you have a Git repository created, you can link that here. As of now, I'm not going to do that. So if you want, you can give keywords as well for your website, but let's leave it as it is. For the author, I'll type in packetcode. Okay, so this is the script that's going to be generated. So I'll click on enter. Now let's open this in Visual Studio Code. Okay, let's open the package.json. Right, so this is the base file for our npm project. Okay, now let's open a new terminal instance here and let's install the packages that we're going to use in this particular project. So the first one is going to be Express. So let's type in npm space install space Express. Apart from Express, we'd also need Mongoose. So basically Mongoose is a ORM for MongoDB, meaning that it's going to give you methods, which are something that you can use to directly interact with MongoDB without actually writing the queries. Meaning, like, let's say you have to get some documents from MongoDB, then you don't need to write the query inside of JavaScript, that is inside of Node. Instead, you can use the method provided by Mongoose, which will internally interact with MongoDB. That means you will not interact with MongoDB, you will not write the queries, you will just call a method called find from Mongoose, and Mongoose is going to handle the background picture. Alright, so let's install that. Alright, so once that is done, a package.log.json will be created. Also node modules will be created. So the first thing that you have to do whenever you're creating a project is add a git ignore file, because obviously you're going to push your code to Git and you don't want node modules to be pushed to your online repository, right? So let's create a git ignore file. Anything that's specified here will be ignored by Git while pushing to GitHub. So here let's type in node modules. Okay, let's save that. As of now, that's all we're going to write here. Okay, now if you scroll to the package.json, you'll see that our entry point is going to be server.js, right? So that's going to be a base file. So let's create that as well. Alright, so now instead of this, since you already have Express installed, we can start writing the Express code to actually create the initial base service, right? So now let's import the Express package. So let's create a new constant variable and let's give it as Express, and that's going to be equated to required. In that, we're going to require Express. Below that, we'll be creating a new constant variable and it's going to be app, which is going to equate to Express. So basically you're creating an object for the Express class. Now let's start the actual server through Express. So it's going to be app.listen, and in that you're going to specify a port. As of now, I'm going to keep it as 3000. Give a space, you're going to use an arrow function, and in here you can type in console.log. Your server has started on port 3000. So let's save that. Let's open the terminal instance once again. Let's clear that. In here, what you can do is that you can actually execute scripts from Node, right? That is, if you go to package.json, you'll see that there is a script here called test. And whenever you type something called npm run test, basically that's going to run the command present here. As of now, we don't want that to happen. We'll just type it as start and we'll change this to Node, give a space, and it's going to be server.js. Let's save that. Now let's type in npm run start. Okay, if you do that, you'll see that your server has started on port 3000. If you now go to the browser and let's say you type in localhost 3000, you can see as of now there is nothing here. There is one more thing here. Like if I go back here and let's say on port number, if I save that and if I go to the browser and refresh, sorry, not browser, if I go back here, you'll see it's not updating, right? So whenever I make any change inside of my server.js, I will have to stop my server, then rerun that again, and then that particular change is going to be reflected. But ideally when you're doing development, we don't want that to happen. The server should automatically restart. So in order to do that, we can use a package called Nodemon. Okay, so let's do that. So basically -save -dev is going to install this particular package as a dev package, meaning that it's not going to be installed inside your main production servers. It's going to be installed only in your local servers while testing. All right. So now once I've installed that, I'll go to package.json, and inside package.json, where you're using node server.js, I'll change it to Nodemon, and let's save that. Now when you run this start script, okay, so let's go back, let's type in npm start. You can ignore the run command as well. Okay, even if you don't type run also, basically that's going to do the same thing. Now let's go back to server.js, and here as you can see, it's saying that Nodemon has started and it is watching the particular file changes, right? So if I now change this to just port and let's save that, automatically you'll see that restarting due to changes. This is printing because whenever you make any change inside of your project, automatically Nodemon is going to see that there is a change and it's going to restart that server, meaning that you don't have to manually stop and restart the server. That's a pretty useful trick. Alright, so now let's actually start creating the REST API. So in here what I'll do is I'll create a new route which I can use and access from external environments. In order to do that, I have to include a package from Express. Express.router. Alright, so let's type in router.get, since it's going to be a GET request. Let's type in / and then it's going to be an arrow function wherein we are going to add request and response. Those are the two parameters that we can accept. In here what I'll do, I'll just type in res.json. So I'll be sending a JSON response back. So in here I'll type in message quotation get request logged. After that there's one more step. So that's going to be app.use quotations /router. Okay, so now let's try to understand what's happening here. So what we're doing is basically we're saying that whenever I get a request to my particular server, and if it is ending with nothing but a /, then do the following that is there inside of this particular method, and that is saying return a JSON response with so and so in the JSON's body. Okay, that is what we're saying, and we're attaching this particular handling of your route to your Express. So basically you're saying whenever I get a request to my /, redirect that to here. Okay, you can add something like test as well. So basically your route is going to be something like http localhost 3000 localhost 3000 /test and then a /. If it is something like that, this method will be executed. Okay, if I let's say type in test2, then this is going to be test2, and this particular request has to be a GET request. So there are multiple requests that are there inside of REST API, right? Get, post, put, patch, and delete, right? So these are some of the basic HTTP methodologies that you use while interacting with your REST API. So these all follow the REST API terminologies, right? So if you have no idea on what these terminologies mean, it's better if you do a simple crash course on your REST API's basics, like how and what REST API methodologies mean and how we have to follow the REST API rules as well. Okay, once you're done with that, you'll be able to pretty much understand what's happening here. So this is a GET request. So basically GET is gonna return back some data. Okay, you're getting some data back from your server, that is your router. All right, so this is how we are handling it. So let's test it once. I'll remove this, I'll remove this as well. So now let's save this. Let's go back to our browser and let's refresh. You'll see that this message has been logged. Okay, so that is your simple GET request, which is going to return back some data. Now that is one way of interacting with your API. The second way is to use some application using which you can directly interact with the APIs, because using a browser is not the ideal way to test your APIs. Okay, so most of the people in the industry use either Postman or Insomnia. I personally prefer Postman, so I'll be going with that. But if you want to explore, you can explore Insomnia as well. So I've already installed Postman on my system, so let's open that. In here, what I'll do is I'll create a new REST request. So I'll click on new. Let's zoom in a bit here. Okay. In here, I'll be creating a new HTTP request, and this is the request creation tab. In here, it's going to be a GET request, and your endpoint is going to be HTTP localhost 3000. Okay, so let's type that in. Let's click on send, and you've got response. So this is the response that we had configured in our server as well. So now let's go back and let's try to add few more things here, and let's extend onto this. All right, so let me zoom in this a bit more. Yep. All right, so now what we'll do is that we'll not write all of our router logic or the controller logic inside our home page or the main page. Instead, we'll be moving this into a separate folder. So for that, what I'll do is I'll create a new folder here. So let's type in as controller. In here, I'll be creating a new controller called recipe controller.js, because our project is basically a cookbook, right? So let's copy this here. Let's paste that. We don't need the app. Let's remove this. So we'll be not using this here. We'll be using that here. And what we'll be doing is that we'll be adding or linking this to our particular controller. So for that, I'll remove that from here, and I'll type in const recipe router, and I'll be linking to recipe controller, and I'll pass that as the argument here. What we'll be doing is that we'll be adding an endpoint as well. So this is how we're going to link that to our router. Okay, apart from that, what we have to do is that we have to export this as well, meaning that if you directly link to this particular router also, this will not be working, because even though you're returning the response here, this has to be written back to your server.js, right? So for that, we'll be using module.exports, and we'll be exporting the router that we had created. Okay, so now our two particular files have been linked correctly. So let's just test whether it's working or not. Let's save that. Let's go back to our API. Let's click on send. Could not send request. Yeah, that is because the endpoint has changed. The recipes. Okay, so let's check the logs. Seems like, okay, I might have written it here wrong. Yeah, that's module, not module. Let's save that. Let's go back. Let's click on send, and yes, we got the response. So this seems to be working. Now let's extend onto this. Apart from get, we also need to write, put, patch, and delete as well, meaning that adding new records, deleting new records, or updating new records as well. So basically, this particular request should fetch all the recipes, right? Apart from this, we also need post, that is adding new recipe or deleting new recipe or updating new recipe. So before doing that, we have to first create a database. So the easiest way to use MongoDB in our project is to use Mongo Atlas. So Mongo Atlas is basically a test DB that is provided by Mongo for free use, that is you can use for your testing purposes, or there is a paid plan as well wherein you can use for enterprise level as well. For now, we'll be using this for testing purposes. So let's type in Mongo Atlas. So if you don't have an account as of yet, you can sign in and create a new account. It's free and it will not charge anything on your bank. Okay. So for now, I'll sign in because I already have an account. Okay. So once you've logged in, your interface is going to be pretty similar to mine. I already have one of my DBs up, so I'll have to create a new DB. So I'll click on here and we'll be creating a new cluster. So here there are multiple options that you can choose from, but I'll be going with the shared one, which is free as of now. You can choose either from AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. I'll leave it as it is in the default and I can click on create. As of now, I'm already using the free tier, so I cannot create more than one. But you can just click on this and that's gonna create your cluster and that's gonna start your DB. It's gonna ask for you to create a username and password, so you can give that there. Copy that password because that's something that you're gonna use to connect to your database. Okay, even if you don't copy that or even if you forget that password, what you can do is that once your database has been created, you can go to database on the left hand side menu In here you can click on connect, and here it's going to show you the options that you can use to connect to your MongoDB. So I'll be using this drivers that's basically giving me access to my DB through some of the packages like Node or Angular or something like that. I'll be using the Mongoose library ORM on top of the MongoDB because that's going to give me, as I said, the methods that I can utilize. So it's telling us to install the Mongoose dependency, but we already have that. So apart from that, there is also a snippet that you have to use. You can check the full snippet as well, how you can use that inside your code. So I'll copy this and we'll be using the latest one as well, right? So I'll close this from here. I'll go back to my project. In here, we'll be creating a new variable to link to our MongoDB. So for that, first we have to initialize the Mongoose library. So let's require Mongoose. Then we can use Mongoose to connect to our DB. In here, we have to give the string, and this is the string that we have to use. You have to change the password from here. So I'll just copy paste my password, which I've previously used. So let's paste that here. This is the password. And also don't try to link to this because I'll be deleting this instance once the video is uploaded. Okay, so now below this, let's use that connection. Okay, so I've written few error handlers here. I'm saying that on error of your DB, you can just print that error log. So basically whenever there is a error in the connection of database, you can print that error. And once, whenever there is a connection established and it's open, that connection is successful, then print this particular log saying that connected to DB. So let's open the terminal instance once again. Let's save that. And once I do that, you'll see that we have got the message connected to DB. That means our connection was successful. But there is one catch here, and that is you should never use your sensitive information directly inside of your code, meaning that your username and password is now visible inside your code directly, and it's hard coded as well. So now when you push your code to GitHub, this particular string is available for anybody who is accessing your project to utilize this, right? So that is not good. So ideally what we do in a production environment is we basically put this particular string inside of an environment variable, and we use that environment variable directly inside of your server. The way that we can do that in local as well is by actually installing a package called .env. So let's instantiate a new instance. Let's type in npm install .env. Once that is done, let's go back to our root directory. Let's type in .env. That's a new package, and we'll be adding this to gitignore as well, meaning that we'll not be pushing this to your GitHub. And in here, I'll just type in db_url, and that's going to be equated to this particular string. Let's save that. Let's copy this. Now let's go back to the main server.js. We'll type in process.env.db_url. So basically that's gonna take your environments variable and replace that here during execution. But in order to actually use this, you have to include the .env package. For that, you can just type in require.env.config. Once you save that, and if you open the terminal instance once again, you'll see that even now we're getting connected to DB, and the connection was successful, even though we don't have the URL directly hard-coded into our code. So now we don't have any security issues. Alright, so with that, we are done with the base file, that is server.js. We'll not be interacting with that anymore. Instead, we'll write all of our logic directly into your recipe controller. Right. So now what we have to do is that we have to write all the methods that we'll be using for interacting with your REST API. So let's first start with the get API. Here, whenever we get a request, what we have to do is that we have to fetch the data from DB and return that data back, right? So let's remove this from here. And in here, let's type in a try catch block. And inside the try, I have to get the data from my database, right? In order to actually get the data back from my database, what we have to do is that we have to first create a Mongo schema. So Mongo schema, or sometimes called as model, is something that basically outlines the type of data that you're storing inside your MongoDB, right? So for that, let's create a new folder called as model. In here, let's create a new model class file, and I'll name it as recipe.js. In here, let's instantiate the Mongoose library once again. We'll be creating a new variable called as recipe, And in here, we'll be creating a new object for mongoose.schema. And we'll be exporting that schema as well. Now inside the schema file, we'll be outlining the data types that we're storing inside of our database. The first thing that we're going to store is the name of the recipe, right? So we'll type in name and we'll be following a similar syntax to JSON. And in here, we'll be outlining the data attributes of this particular data type. So meaning that our name is actually going to be a string, right? So the type of this particular data point is going to be a string. Apart from this, you can also add some constraints saying that, let's say you want this data to be present in every post request, meaning that whenever you create a new record inside of your DB, this particular field should be present. So for that, you will be adding required as true. Similarly, let's create another data point, and that is going to be category. This is going to tell what category your recipe belongs to. Apart from that, you can also add items that are there inside of your recipe. And here, this is not a string, instead it's an array. So you'll be sending an array of items. And just for testing purposes, let's make this as false. Okay. So these are the three main things that any recipe could actually need, right? Apart from these things, we can also include timestamps. So meaning that whenever a record is created inside your DB or updated inside your DB, there are two particular flags that are inserted automatically. And that is created on and last modified on. So created on is going to tell when this particular record is created in your DB, and last modified on, as it says, it's going to tell you when this particular record has been updated. So you don't need to do any logic for that. MongoDB gives you an option where you can include that by default. So I can type in timestamps as true. And once I do that, our model is ready. Okay, so basically model is something like a constraint that you're putting on the data that is being stored inside of your MongoDB database. So what I'm saying here is that any record inside my DB should definitely contain a name. It should definitely contain a category. Containing items is not mandatory. So that particular record could either have items or could not have items. But these two are mandatory. And by default, timestamps also should be present for that particular record. And in Mongo terms, it's not a record, it's basically a document. So every document should have these two. And this particular thing is non-mandatory for that document. Once the rules have been imposed, we'll go back to our router class. In here, let's require that. It's going to be present inside of models. So we'll be adding that to a variable called recipe. Now, whenever you create any model class, and since you're using mongoose.schema, automatically, whenever your connection is established, it's going to look inside your database for this particular schema based collection. Okay, so now this recipe variable that I've created, or the recipe object that I've created, I can use this to actually fetch or insert or update or delete my data inside my database. So now inside the controller, inside the try block, I'll be typing in recipe.find. So basically this is gonna find all the records present inside my database and it's gonna return that back. I'll paste that inside of a variable called recipes, and then what I'll do is I'll just return this back here. So it's going to be recipes.json, and in that JSON I'll be sending in recipes. So this JSON is basically returning back your body of the JSON. But apart from this, you also need to specify the status of the request. So whenever you interact with your REST API, if that request was successful, you're going to get a response with a status code, and that status code is going to define what happened with that request. If I give out, let's say 200 represents a status okay, that's terminology from REST API. So 200 is going to say it was a successful request, meaning that the response was successfully given back to the requester. But let's say if you get something like 500, it's an internal server error, meaning that there was some issue with your service that you were trying to interact, meaning that there was some issue in the REST API that we had created. There are a few standard error codes, like 200 is for OK and 500 is for internal server error, or some other codes, right? So 403 is there, 404 is there. All these things specify what the response is going to be returned back and what happened with that request. Okay, so here we can send that back as well. So I'll just type in status and I'll give it as 200 for now. And in the case that there is an error, we'll be catching that and we'll be returning the response back. And here what I'll be doing is that I'll be returning the error response, and it's going to be 500. Okay, so let's save that and let's go back to the API request. Let's type in send, could not send the request. Let's see what's happening here in the server. Okay, so our app has crashed. Okay, it is saying it was not able to find, right? So it's not models, it's model. Let's save that. Okay, now our server is up and running. Let's go back. Let's click on send once again. Okay, it is saying that some error happened and it was not able to fetch that data. Okay, the issue is because it's not recipes, it's basically res. That is response. My mistake. Let's save that. Let's go back, hit on that once again. Okay, now when you hit that, you're getting 500 internal server error once again, but there is no error. And the reason why that is happening is because in JavaScript, most of the things that you do, like hitting an API or something like that, happens in a different thread. And basically it's an asynchronous call. So in order to handle asynchronous calls, we have to use async await from JavaScript. So we'll type in async and we'll be typing await here. Basically what we're doing is that by adding async, we're saying that this particular callback function is not a direct synchronous callback function, it's a asynchronous callback function. And instead of that, you have to wait for the response given from this particular method, and once that response has been returned back, only then execute this and return back the response. So we'll be saving this here, and now let's go back and let's hit on send once again. And now you got a status 200 okay, and you got an empty array. That means that as of now there is no data in the DB, but your request was successful. So if you had data in your DB, this would have been not empty, right? So now let's add on to this and let's actually add some data into our DB. So I'll be quickly writing a post request as well. So let me do that. Alright, so what I've done is I've copy pasted the get request and I've changed it to post because we'll be creating data inside of the DB. And in the post request, similarly to the get request, I have a try catch block. In the try, I'm trying to use recipe.create. And here what I'm doing is I'm getting the request, and from the request, I'm getting the body. Okay, so if I go back to Postman, you'll see that whenever I hit request, there is a body section here, right? I can pass some data here, and whatever data is being passed in this will be able to access that here, and you'll be sending that back to your server, and that is going to create data in your DB. That's going to be returned back. This recipe is going to have the data that was created, and we'll just send that back. Okay, I'm giving a status of 201 saying that post request was successful and data was created. And if you have some errors, you'll be catching that and you'll be returning that back. And also I'm just returning the error message instead of just the error, because that's going to be a bit more easy to understand, right? So let's do that for the get request as well. Now let's save that. Okay, so we'll go back, we'll be creating a new request. So duplicate this. Here we'll be creating a post request and it's going to be recipes only. Now what I'll do is I'll go back to my body section, and in here let's click on draw and we'll be sending a JSON request. So inside this, let's create a new JSON, and if you remember, we need to send three main things, right? So the first one is going to be name. I'll be creating omelette. Second one is going to be category, and let's say it's going to be breakfast. The third one is going to be items, and it's going to be an array. So that's going to be eggs, salt, and pepper. Okay, now when I hit this, you'll see that we are getting 500 internal server error, and it is saying that category and name are required. Even though we are seeing that, we are still getting that. So ideally, whenever you hit an API and that is handled by Express, that means you're getting that request in Express, that data has to be parsed into JSON. So if I go back to my server.js, in here we'll need to add a middleware, okay, meaning that whatever request that I'm getting to my particular server has to be converted to a JSON request, and then only it needs to be processed by my router as well as my any other operations that are happening inside the Express logic, right? So for that, what I'll do is that after the connection has been created for DB and before actually initializing the controller, I'll do something like app.use. In here I'll type in express.json. So basically this is a middleware that is defined by Express, and what it's going to do is that it's going to convert all the incoming requests to a JSON request, and then only it's going to be passed to my router. In this way, by the time it reaches my schema or by the time it reaches my router, it's going to be passed to a JSON request. So now let's go back and let's retry once again. Now you'll see that the request was successful and it is saying 201 created. And this is the record that was created and this is the ID for that record. Now if I go back to the get request and if I now hit this, you're going to get some data back, right? You're going to get all the data that is being saved into your DB. If I do something like sandwich, and let's say it's going to be breakfast, and I'll not add the items. Let's hit that once again. Now let's go back and get the data. You'll see that we have omelette as well as sandwich. And you'll see that we have created it and updated it. Basically, that's going to see when it was created and when it was updated. Right? So these are the items that we already have right now in our DB. Now let's try to update the sandwiches. And as you can see, there is a spelling mistake here, right? So let's update that. For that, we need to have a update route, right? So let's copy this here. Let's paste that. And now there are two ways that you can do this. Either you can do a put operation or you can do a patch operation. The difference between put and patch is basically, if you do a put request, you have to input all the data that you want inside your DB record. Meaning that you can see that this particular document that is there inside of your DB has few things like ID, name, category, and items. Now, if you want to do a put request, you have to specifically give the name, category, and items once again, meaning that all these three things will be updated. But if you do a patch, what happens is the only thing that you give in your request will be updated, meaning that if I just want to update name, I can just give name in my request and only this will be updated. These two will remain as it is. That is the main difference. Put will update everything and patch will update specifically what you want and whatever you send in your request. So in this case, we'll be using patch. Alright, so we'll leave the catch as it is and we'll try to update the try block, right? So in here, what I'll do is we need to first get some data from your request. Okay, so what I mean by that is, apart from your data that needs to be updated, you also need to know what documents data has to be updated, right? There are, let's say, 10 documents. You have to update the 9th document in your database. Then you need to have the ID of that 9th document. So in this case, you have to get that ID from your request only, right? So let's first create the request. So we'll duplicate this. Let's do a patch. And in here, the body is going to be like this. So I'll change it to sandwich. Let's remove the category. And apart from this, we'll be sending a parameter in your request, and that's going to be ID. And this is going to be your previously created record. So if I do a get request, you'll see that this is the request that we got back. This is the ID for that particular document. So I'll paste that ID here. So you can see that there is a query parameter that is being added here, that is ID, and this is the value for that particular ID. We will use this ID and we'll be updating that particular document with this particular data. So for that, we have to get that ID from your request, and this is how you're going to do that. You're going to type in const ID, and that's going to equate to request.query. And you're using angle brackets is because query is going to be a list of items, and you just want one item from it, and that's going to be assigned to ID. So if you do angle brackets, that array is going to be converted to a singleton, and you will have your ID from that. Now below this, what you can do is that you can do a validation saying that if my ID is not present inside my request, I can just send a response back saying ID is mandatory and that has to be present inside my request. Okay, that is something that you can add, but for now I'll just skip it. In here, let's create a new variable and let's type it as recipe. It's going to be an await once again, and in here let's type in recipe dot find by ID and update. So basically, find by ID and update is a method given by Mongoose, which is going to find that particular record using the ID that you provide, and it's going to update using the data that you provided. In here, let's type in the ID as a first parameter, and the second parameter is going to be request.body. So this is what it's going to do. It's going to update that, right? Once the update is done, you can return this particular response back, but this is going to return back the old recipe that you have. It's not going to return the updated one because you're not fetching it again, right? You're just finding, updating. You're not repulling that updated data back, right? So that's not going to work. So what you have to do is that you have to fetch that data once again and return that as a response. But before that, let's say in a scenario wherein it is not able to find any record with that particular ID, then this particular block is going to fail. And you have to write an error handler for that as well. Meaning that you have to write something like if recipe is not there, then you'll have to return back an error log saying that there is no particular record inside your DB with this particular ID, right? So that is what you have to do. I'll just skip it, assuming that you are able to do that. Okay. Now what I'll do is I'll just type in const updated recipe, and I'll type in await and I'll type in find by ID. In here I'll type in the ID, and then I'll return that response back. Let's save that. Let's go back and let's try to update. Okay, seems like that was successful. Let's go back to the get request as well. Let's try to hit that, and you'll see that it has updated to sandwich. Now one final thing is we'll see how we can delete a record as well. So we'll just follow the same approach that we have followed in patch. Let's create a delete route as well. And in here, I still have to get the ID. You can apply the same validation that you have applied previously, that is checking whether you have the ID or not. So you can write an error log here saying that if the ID is not present, return back the error response saying that ID is a mandatory key. Now instead of find by ID and update, I'll do find by ID and delete. You don't need to pass the request body for that. And let's just send 200 because there is no update query that's happening here. So let's save that. Let's go back and let's copy this ID. Let's go back here. Let's create a new request. So let's duplicate this. I'll be using a delete. I'll update this as my ID. And there is no body required for this. Let's click on send. Okay, so this is failing. That is because we are still trying to fetch the updated ID that will not exist anymore. We just have to return that particular recipe. Alright, so now let's click on send, and ideally that should return 200, and seems like this particular record has been deleted. Let's go back to get request and let's click on send, and now we should only have one document. Yes, we only have one document. If I just copy this and delete it as well, that was successful. Let's go and click on get. You are back to square one and you don't have any records now. Seems like the delete is working as well. So basically we've created the delete, patch, post, and get. If you want, you can update this and say instead of getting all the documents, just get one. Okay, so if you pass the ID here as well, you can get a specific record as well if you want. Okay, you can just say an if condition saying if I have my ID inside my request query parameter, then search saying that find one. Okay, in here you can pass in the ID and the query parameter value, and that's going to search for that particular record. Or if you don't want to find one, if you want to find all the records, you can just use. So that is how you can actually use Node Express on MongoDB in order to create a simple REST API that will cater to your basic needs, right? So you can extend onto this and add complexities onto this and create a complete full-blown API as well. So experiment with this and let me know how it works out. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you have liked what I've seen till now. If you did, then please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.